The rusted padlock fell to the ground with a hollow clang that echoed through Evelyn Carter's bones. For 35 years, her husband had forbidden her from entering this barn, even threatened divorce if she ever tried. Now, 3 days after his funeral, she pushed open the weathered door with trembling hands. What she saw inside brought her crashing to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The secret Jonathan had protected for decades wasn't what she'd feared. It was far more devastating. Follow this heartbreaking story to the end, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown grass as Evelyn Carter stood at her kitchen window staring at the barn that had haunted her marriage for 35 years. The old structure sat 50 yards from the main house, its red paint peeling like dried blood, revealing the gray bones of weathered wood beneath. She clutched her coffee mug with both hands, the ceramic warm against her palms, but the warmth couldn't reach the cold that had settled in her chest since Jonathan's death 3 days ago. "Mrs. Carter." The voice startled her. She turned to find Michael, Jonathan's lawyer, standing in the doorway with a manila envelope in his hands. He was a young man, perhaps 30, with kind eyes that reminded her of her husband when they'd first met. "I'm sorry to intrude," Michael said softly. "I knocked, but when you didn't answer, I let myself in. The door was unlocked." "It's fine," Evelyn replied, setting down her mug. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "Jonathan never locked the doors. Said there was nothing in this house worth stealing." Michael's gaze drifted to the window to the barn beyond. "Except that—" "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "Except that." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, then extended the envelope. "These are Jonathan's final instructions. He asked me to deliver them personally 3 days after the funeral." Evelyn took the envelope with fingers that trembled slightly. It was heavier than she expected, and she could feel something small and hard inside along with the papers. "He also asked me to remind you of your promise," Michael added, his voice barely above a whisper. The promise. How could she forget, even on his deathbed, when the cancer had reduced him to a shadow of the man she'd married? Jonathan had gripped her hand with surprising strength and made her swear. "Promise me, Evie," he'd rasped, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that frightened her. "Promise you'll never open that barn, not even after I'm gone. Promise me." And she had promised, though the words had tasted like ash in her mouth. "I remember," she told Michael now. The lawyer nodded, gathered his briefcase, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. "Mrs. Carter, for what it's worth, Jonathan loved you more than anything in this world. Whatever's in that barn, whatever secrets he kept, he did it out of love." After Michael left, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. The letter was written in Jonathan's careful script, though she could see where his hand had shaken toward the end. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're alone with questions I could never answer. I know I've asked the impossible of you to leave the barn locked forever, to never seek the truth I've hidden. But I'm asking once more. Please, my love, let it remain closed. Let the past stay buried. I've left you everything else, the house, the savings, the truck. Live well, my darling. Travel to those places we always talked about but never visited. Find happiness again. But please leave the barn alone. All my love eternally. Jonathan." Evelyn read the letter 3 times before she noticed the key. It was small brass with an unusual shape, definitely not the key to the barn's padlock. She turned it over in her palm, studying it, wondering what it opened and why Jonathan had included it with his final message. The kitchen felt suddenly suffocating. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum, and walked outside. The September air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her toward the barn. She stopped 20 feet away, close enough to see the heavy padlock that had been there since 1988, the year after they'd married. The chain was thick industrial grade, far more security than a simple barn should need. What had Jonathan been protecting? Or perhaps the better question was, what had he been hiding? 35 years, she said aloud, her voice carried away by the wind. 35 years of secrets. She thought back to the beginning, to when they'd first moved to this property in rural Tennessee. Jonathan had been so excited about the barn, talking about turning it into a workshop where he could restore old cars, a hobby he'd always dreamed of pursuing. But within a month, the padlock had appeared and his enthusiasm had transformed into something else, something darker. "You don't need to go in there," he'd said when she'd asked about it. "It's just my space. Every man needs a space that's his own." She'd accepted it at first. After all, they were newlyweds, still learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. But as months turned to years and years to decades, the barn had become a source of quiet tension between them. She'd catch him going out there at odd hours sometimes, in the middle of the night when he thought she was asleep. He'd return hours later, slipping back into bed with cold skin and the smell of sawdust in his hair. The memory of those nights made her shiver. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned back to the house, but movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. A blue pickup truck was pulling into the driveway. Tom Morrison, their nearest neighbor. Tom climbed out of his truck with the careful movements of a man whose joints protested the years of farm work. He'd been Jonathan's closest friend, though even that friendship had its limits. Evelyn had never seen Tom enter the barn either. "Evelyn," Tom called out, removing his worn baseball cap. "I've been meaning to stop by, see how you're holding up." "I'm managing," she replied, though the words felt like a lie. Tom's eyes drifted to the barn, then back to her. "You know, Jonathan and I went back 40 years, knew him before you two even met." "I know." "He ever tell you about Sarah?" The name hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "Sarah." Tom's weathered face creased with surprise. "He never mentioned her." "Well, I suppose that makes sense. It was before your time, and Jonathan, well, he wasn't one to dwell on the past." "Who was she?" Evelyn asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting bringing it up. "She was, someone he knew before you. They were together for a while, but it ended badly. Real badly. That's all I should say. It wasn't my story to tell when he was alive, and it sure isn't now that he's gone. Tom, please. I've lived with that locked barn for 35 years. If there's something I should know..." "The only thing you need to know is that Jonathan loved you," Tom interrupted firmly. "Whatever happened before, whatever he kept in that barn, it doesn't change that fact. The man loved you fierce and true." After Tom left, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about the name. Sarah. Who was she? What had happened between her and Jonathan that was so terrible he'd never even mentioned her existence? That night, Evelyn lay in the bed she'd shared with Jonathan for so many years, staring at the ceiling. The house felt enormous around her, full of empty spaces that seemed to echo with absence. She could hear the wind rattling the windows, the old wood settling with familiar creaks and groans. But underneath those sounds, she swore she could hear something else, a whisper calling from the barn. She got up and walked to the window. The barn stood in silhouette against the star-filled sky, a dark shape that seemed to pulse with secrets. As she watched, she could have sworn she saw a light flicker in one of the high windows just for a moment, like a candle being lit and immediately extinguished. "Impossible," she whispered. The barn had no electricity. Jonathan had made sure of that when he'd locked it up. He'd even had the power company disconnect the line, but the light flickered again. Evelyn's heart began to race. She grabbed Jonathan's old flannel robe, wrapping it around herself like armor, and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, she found the flashlight they kept in the junk drawer, tested it, then stepped out into the night. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through her slippers within steps. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, creating dancing shadows that made her jump at every movement. As she approached the barn, she could hear something, a rhythmic creaking like old wood swaying in the wind. She circled the structure, searching for the source of the light she'd seen, but all the windows were dark and covered with decades of grime. The only entrance was the main door, secured with that industrial padlock. Standing there in the darkness, Evelyn made a decision. Promise or no promise, she couldn't live like this. She couldn't spend the rest of her life wondering what her husband had hidden from her. Tomorrow, she would cut the lock. Tomorrow, she would finally learn the truth. But when she returned to the house, she found something that changed everything. On the kitchen table, where she was certain she'd left only Jonathan's letter and the mysterious brass key, there was now a photograph. It was old. The edges yellowed and curled, showing a much younger Jonathan standing next to a beautiful dark-haired woman. They were in front of the barn. She could see it clearly in the background, though it looked newer, the red paint fresh and bright. The woman Sarah. It had to be Sarah was pregnant. Very pregnant. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, and Jonathan's hand covered hers. They were both smiling, but there was something in their eyes, something that made Evelyn's blood run cold. She flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Our little family, June 1987." 1987. A year before she and Jonathan had met. A year before they'd moved to this property and he'd locked the barn. Evelyn sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Jonathan had been with someone else, someone who was pregnant with his child. What had happened to them? Where were they now, and why had he never told her? The next morning, Evelyn drove to the town library. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian who'd held the position for as long as anyone could remember, looked up from her desk as Evelyn approached. "Evelyn, dear, I'm so sorry about Jonathan. He was a good man." "Thank you, Margaret. I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm looking for information about someone named Sarah, who might have lived in town around 1987. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Sarah, that's not a very uncommon name, dear. Do you have a last name?" "No, but she was involved with Jonathan before we met." The librarian's face went pale. Oh dear, you're asking about Sarah Mitchell. You knew her. Everyone knew her, or knew of her at least." Mrs. Henderson glanced around as if checking to make sure they were alone, then leaned closer. "It was a terrible tragedy. Just terrible. Are you sure you want to know this, Evelyn? Some stones are better left unturned." "Please, I need to know." Mrs. Henderson sighed deeply. Sarah Mitchell came to town in early 1987. She was a sweet girl, a nurse at the county hospital. She and Jonathan fell in love fast, the kind of love that burns bright and hot. They were engaged within 3 months, and she was pregnant not long after that. What happened to her, to the baby? "There was an accident," Mrs. Henderson said quietly. "A terrible accident. It was December 1987, just a week before Christmas. The roads were icy. Sarah was driving home from her shift at the hospital when her car went off the road and hit a tree. She died instantly. The baby, too." Evelyn felt the room spin around her. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Jonathan never said anything. Not a word in 35 years. He took it hard. Harder than anyone I've ever seen grieve. He disappeared for a while after the funeral. When he came back, he was different, quieter, more closed off. Then he met you the following spring, and we all thought, well, we thought you'd saved him." "The barn," Evelyn whispered. "He locked it right after we moved in." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "I always wondered about that. Sarah used to talk about how they were going to convert it into a nursery and playroom for the baby. She had all these plans, these dreams." Evelyn left the library feeling as if she was walking through a dream, or a nightmare. She understood now why Jonathan had locked the barn, why he'd forbidden her from entering. It was a tomb of dreams, a monument to the family he'd lost before she'd even known him. But understanding didn't ease the ache in her chest. If anything, it made it worse. Their entire marriage, Jonathan had been grieving another woman, another child. Every time she'd mentioned wanting children, every time she'd cried over another negative pregnancy test, he'd been thinking of Sarah and the baby they'd lost. When she got home, she stood before the barn with bolt cutters in her hands. The metal was cold against her palms, heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. She'd bought them at the hardware store, ignoring the curious looks from people who knew Jonathan had just died, who wondered what the widow Carter needed with bolt cutters. "I'm sorry, Jonathan," she said to the padlock, "but I can't live with this anymore. I need to see. I need to know." The lock was stronger than she'd expected. It took several attempts, her arm shaking with the effort before the cutters finally bit through the metal. The chain fell away with a sound like breaking bones. The door swung open on hinges that screamed in protest. The smell hit her first dust and old wood, but underneath something else. Something sweet and faint like baby powder. Evelyn stepped inside and froze. The barn had been transformed into a nursery. Not just any nursery, but the most elaborate loving space she'd ever seen. The walls were covered with hand-painted murals, rolling hills, and fairy tale castles, dragons, and knights, princesses, and magical forests. A beautiful wooden crib stood in the center, carved with intricate designs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with toys that had never been played with, books that had never been read. But that wasn't what brought Evelyn to her knees. The walls between the murals were covered with papers, hundreds of them. As she crawled closer, her vision blurred with tears. She saw they were letters. Letters written in Jonathan's hand. Letters to a child who was never born. "Dear little one," the first one began, "today would have been your first birthday. Your mother and I had so many plans for this day. She wanted to make you a cake shaped like an elephant she loved. Elephants said they were good luck." Evelyn read through tears, her heart breaking with every word. The letters spanned decades. Jonathan had written one every year on what would have been the child's birthday, on Christmas, on the anniversary of the accident. He'd written about his life with Evelyn, about how much he loved her, about how guilty he felt for moving on. "I married a wonderful woman named Evelyn," one letter read. "You would have loved her. She's kind and patient and has the most beautiful laugh. But I can't tell her about you. I can't share this pain with her. It wouldn't be fair. This grief is mine to carry." There was more. So much more. Jonathan had filled notebooks with imagined conversations, milestones that never happened, advice for a child who never existed. He'd bought toys every year, action figures for the son. He'd imagined dolls for the daughter he'd sometimes pictured instead. He'd collected books, from picture books to young adult novels, creating a library for every age his child would never reach. In one corner, Evelyn found a rocking chair with a guitar leaning against it. Sheet music was scattered on a small table, lullabies Jonathan had written but never sung to anyone. "Oh, Jonathan," she sobbed, clutching one of the notebooks to her chest. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you carry this alone?" As she sat there among the relics of a life that never was, Evelyn began to understand the depth of her husband's pain. But more than that, she began to understand the depth of his love for Sarah, for their unborn child, but also for her. He'd protected her from this grief, had chosen to bear it alone rather than burden her with the ghost of his first love. She found another letter, this one different from the others. It was addressed to her. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then you've broken your promise and you're in the barn. I'm not angry. I think part of me always knew you would need to see this eventually. You're too strong, too curious to live with an unopened door forever. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the lies. But mostly, I'm sorry that I couldn't give you the one thing you wanted most, a child of our own. Every time you cried, every negative test, every failed treatment, it broke me twice. Once for your pain, and once because I felt like I was being punished, like I'd had my chance at fatherhood and lost it and didn't deserve another. This barn became my sanctuary and my prison. Here I could pretend for a few hours that things were different, that Sarah had lived, that our child had been born, that I could somehow have had both lives, the one I lost and the one I found with you. But that's not how life works, is it? We don't get do-overs. We just get to move forward with our scars and our secrets and hope that love is enough to bridge the gaps. You were enough, Evelyn. You were more than enough. You gave me 35 years of happiness I didn't think I deserved. You loved me despite my locked doors and midnight disappearances. You stayed even when I couldn't explain why I was broken. I should have told you. I should have trusted you with this pain. But I was a coward. I thought if I spoke about it, it would make it real in a way that would destroy me. And I thought it would destroy us, that you'd always wonder if you were second choice, if I was comparing you to her, if our love was just a consolation prize. None of that was true. I loved Sarah, yes. I'll never deny that. But I loved you differently, deeper, longer. Sarah was my spring bright and brief and beautiful. You were my summer, autumn, and winter. You were the rest of my life. If you're reading this in the barn, surrounded by the museum of my grief, please don't hate me. And please don't think this diminishes what we had. These aren't the tokens of a man who couldn't let go. They're the attempts of a man trying to honor a life that never got to be lived while fully living the life he had. The brass key I left you opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside you'll find Sarah's diary and some photos. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them, but I couldn't keep them here either. Read them if you want, or don't. The choice is yours now, Shay. I love you, Evelyn. I've loved you every day since we met, and if there's anything after this life, I'll love you there too. Forever yours, Jonathan. Evelyn sat in that barn until the sun began to set, reading every letter, touching every toy, trying to absorb 35 years of hidden grief. When she finally stood to leave, her legs were numb and her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked around the space one more time. Tomorrow she would have to decide what to do with all of this. But tonight she just needed to process the truth of her marriage, that it had been built on a foundation of unspoken sorrow, but also on a love strong enough to contain that sorrow without breaking. As she walked back to the house, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. The anger she'd expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a strange kind of peace. Jonathan had loved her, truly deeply loved her, and he'd loved Sarah too. The human heart, she was learning, was vast enough to hold multiple loves, multiple griefs, multiple truths all at once. That night she retrieved the brass key and drove to the bank. The safety deposit box was small, containing only a leather journal and a handful of photographs. She brought them home but didn't open them. Not yet. Tonight was for processing what she'd already learned. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table looking out at the barn. It no longer seemed like a forbidden place, a dark secret. Now it was just sad. Infinitely heartbreakingly sad. The phone rang, startling her. It was her sister Patricia calling from Ohio. "Evie, I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay?" Evelyn paused, considering the question. "I'm okay, Patty. It's been a strange day." "Do you want me to come out? I can be there by tomorrow afternoon." "No, not yet. I need some time to think, to figure things out." "Figure what out, Evie? What's going on?" Evelyn told her everything. About the barn, about Sarah, about the nursery frozen in time. Patricia listened without interrupting, though Evelyn could hear her sharp intakes of breath at certain revelations. "My God," Patricia finally said, "all those years. How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. Sad, confused, but also oddly relieved. At least now I know why he was the way he was, why he'd go quiet sometimes, staring at nothing, why he couldn't talk about children after the doctors told us I couldn't conceive. You couldn't have children because of your condition. He couldn't have children because he'd already lost one. God, Evie, it's like you were both grieving the same thing from different angles. I suppose we were. They talked for another hour before Patricia finally said goodbye, but not before extracting a promise that Evelyn would call if she needed anything. Alone again, Evelyn opened Sarah's diary. The entries were sweet, full of hope and love and dreams for the future. Sarah had been a good person, kind and thoughtful. She'd loved Jonathan with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love that only comes with youth and first chances. The final entry was dated the day she died. December 18th, 1987. Jonathan finished the baby's room today. It's perfect, more perfect than I ever imagined. He painted the last of the mural, a little elephant, for good luck, just like I wanted. I can't wait to bring our little one home to this magical space. The roads are bad today, but I have to go to work. 2 more weeks until maternity leave. 2 more weeks until I can nest properly and wait for this little miracle to arrive. Jonathan is worried about me driving. He offered to take me, but he has that big meeting with the contractor about the restaurant expansion. This is our future he's building for me, for the baby, for our little family. I told him I'd be careful. I promised I'd call when I got to the hospital. I love him so much it hurts sometimes. Is that normal? To love someone so much that your chest feels too small to contain it. I hope our baby inherits his eyes, those beautiful blue eyes that see right through to my soul. Time to go. The snow is getting worse. All my love to my 2 favorite people in the world, the one I married and the one I'm carrying. Evelyn closed the diary, unable to read anymore. Sarah never made it to the hospital. She never got to call Jonathan. She never got to bring her baby home to that magical nursery. Instead, Jonathan had preserved it all like a shrine to the future that should have been. And then he'd met Evelyn, and he'd had to choose between his past and his future. He'd chosen both in a way, living a double life that must have torn him apart every single day. The next morning, Evelyn called Tom Morrison. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right." "Did you know about the nursery and the barn?" There was a long pause. "I suspected. Jonathan would buy things, sometimes toys, books, said they were for charity, but I never saw him donate them. And sometimes when he'd been drinking, he'd talk about Sarah and the baby. Not directly, but in a way that made me think he hadn't let go. Why didn't anyone tell me? What good would it have done? Would it have changed anything? You made him happy, Evelyn. Happier than any of us thought he could be after what happened. We figured some secrets were worth keeping if it meant protecting that happiness. After Tom hung up, Evelyn stood in her kitchen looking at the barn. She had a decision to make. She could clean it out, donate everything, and try to forget what she'd discovered. Or she could honor it. Honor Jonathan's grief, Sarah's memory, and the child who never got to be. She thought about her own grief, all those years of infertility, the ache of empty arms and a quiet house. She thought about Jonathan carrying his sorrow alone, unable to share it with the woman he loved because he was too afraid of hurting her. They'd both been so foolish, she realized, so concerned with protecting each other that they'd never realized they could have grieved together. Their losses were different, but loss was loss. They could have helped each other carry it. But it was too late for could-haves and should-haves. Jonathan was gone, and Evelyn was left with a barn full of ghosts and a heart full of understanding. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of decisions and discoveries. Evelyn found herself drawn to the barn every morning, sitting in the rocking chair Jonathan had placed there, reading through his letters with fresh eyes. Each visit revealed something new, a detail in the murals she hadn't noticed, a toy tucked behind others, another notebook filled with his careful handwriting. One morning, as October rain drummed against the barn's roof, she discovered a box she'd overlooked in her initial exploration. It was tucked beneath the crib, wrapped in an old quilt. Inside were baby clothes still in their tags, ranging from newborn to toddler sizes. Jonathan had bought them over the years, unable to stop himself from imagining his child growing up. "Mrs. Carter!" The voice startled her. She looked up to find a young woman standing in the barn's doorway, silhouetted against the gray morning light. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and kind brown eyes that seemed familiar somehow. "I'm sorry for intruding," the woman said, stepping inside tentatively. "I knocked at the house, but when no one answered, I saw the barn was open. I'm Rebecca Mitchell." Mitchell. Evelyn's heart skipped. "You're related to Sarah." "She was my aunt, my father's sister." Rebecca's eyes swept across the nursery, and her face crumpled. "Oh my God, he kept it all. He actually kept it all. You knew about this." Rebecca shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, not exactly, but my father always said Mr. Carter bought the old Mitchell place after the accident. This barn, this was going to be their home. Sarah and Jonathan were renovating it together before she died." Evelyn stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting. "Your family sold it to him. My grandparents couldn't bear to keep it after Sarah died. Too many memories. They moved to Florida and my father handled the sale. Mr. Carter paid twice what it was worth, insisted on it. Dad never understood why until now." Rebecca moved closer to the murals, running her fingers along a painted butterfly. "Sarah painted these, didn't she? She was always artistic." "I think Jonathan painted them," Evelyn said softly. "Based on her designs, maybe. There are sketches in one of the notebooks." Rebecca turned to face her, and Evelyn could see Sarah in her features, the same delicate bone structure, the same expressive eyes. "I'm sorry. This must be so difficult for you finding all this after your husband passed." "It's been unexpected," Evelyn admitted. "But I'm glad to meet you. Would you like some coffee? We could talk about Sarah if you're comfortable with that." They walked back to the house together, the rain creating a curtain of sound around them. In the kitchen, as Evelyn prepared coffee, Rebecca studied the photographs on the refrigerator, pictures of Evelyn and Jonathan through the years, vacations and holidays, ordinary moments captured and preserved. "You two looked happy," Rebecca observed. "We were. Despite everything, we were." "My father never talked much about Sarah," Rebecca said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "It was too painful for him. They were only 18 months apart, very close. When she died, part of him died too. But sometimes, usually after a few drinks at family gatherings, he'd tell stories about her, how she could light up a room just by walking into it, how she sang constantly even in her sleep sometimes." "Jonathan mentioned the singing in one of his letters," Evelyn said. He wrote that he missed her voice most of all. Rebecca's eyes widened. He wrote letters. Evelyn nodded and found herself telling Rebecca everything about the yearly letters to the unborn child, the accumulated toys and books, the guitar with its unsung lullabies. Rebecca listened occasionally, wiping away tears, occasionally smiling at some detail that reminded her of family stories. "Would you like to read some of them?" Evelyn asked. "The ones about Sarah, I mean. Not the private ones to the baby, but the ones where he talks about her, remembers her." "I would love that. My father, he died 5 years ago. He always regretted not knowing more about Sarah's last months. My grandparents were too grief-stricken to talk about it, and then too much time had passed." They spent the afternoon in the barn, Evelyn reading selected passages aloud while Rebecca examined the toys and books, occasionally sharing memories sparked by something Jonathan had written. It was strange, Evelyn thought, to be grieving alongside someone who was mourning a loss from 35 years ago. But grief, she was learning, didn't follow linear time. It existed outside of chronology, always present tense, always now. "Sarah would have loved this," Rebecca said, holding up a wooden puzzle in the shape of a train. She collected trains as a child, had a whole shelf of them in her bedroom. "Jonathan must have remembered," Evelyn replied, noticing for the first time just how many train-themed toys were scattered throughout the barn. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca shared photos from her phone, old family pictures she'd digitized of Sarah as a child, a teenager, a young woman. In them, Evelyn could see the person Jonathan had fallen in love with, vibrant, laughing, full of life and possibility. "This was taken the week before she died," Rebecca said, showing Evelyn a photo of Sarah at what appeared to be a Christmas party. She was radiant, her pregnancy making her glow, one hand resting on her belly while the other held Jonathan's hand. "My dad took it at the hospital staff party. It's the last photo we have of her." Evelyn studied Jonathan's face in the picture. He looked so young, so unmarked by loss. She'd never seen him smile quite like that in all their years together, not because he hadn't been happy with her, but because this was the smile of someone who hadn't yet learned that happiness could be snatched away in an instant. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said hesitantly. "Did Mr. Carter ever talk about wanting children with you?" The question stung, but Evelyn answered honestly. "We tried for years. Fertility treatments, specialists, everything. It never happened. Now I understand why he couldn't talk about it. Every failed attempt must have reminded him of what he'd already lost." "That must have been incredibly lonely for both of you." "It was, but we found other ways to be happy. We traveled. We had friends. We built a life. It wasn't the life either of us had originally planned, but it was good. It was enough." Rebecca left as evening approached, but not before exchanging phone numbers with Evelyn and promising to return. "My mother would love to see this," she said. "She married my dad 3 years after Sarah died, and she's always felt like she was competing with a ghost. Maybe seeing this, understanding how much Mr. Carter grieved too, would help her understand that some loves don't diminish others." Alone again, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with Sarah's diary and the stack of photos from the safety deposit box. She'd been putting off looking at them all, but Rebecca's visit had given her courage. These weren't rivals or threats. They were just pieces of Jonathan's story chapters that came before her, but led to her nonetheless. The photos showed Jonathan and Sarah at various stages of their relationship, at a carnival sharing cotton candy, on a hiking trail both muddy and laughing, at what looked like Thanksgiving dinner surrounded by Sarah's family. And then the pregnancy photos, Sarah's growing belly chronicled week by week, Jonathan's hands framing the bump, both of them looking at the camera with such hope. The last photo was different. It was Jonathan alone standing in front of the barn, dated January 1988, after Sarah's death, but before he'd locked it up. He looked hollow, destroyed, like a man who'd been emptied out and was just going through the motions of being alive. This was the Jonathan who would meet her 4 months later at a coffee shop in Nashville, the one who would smile sadly when she asked if he'd ever been in love before and say, "Once, but that was another lifetime." The phone rang, pulling her from her reverie. It was Patricia. "Just checking in. How are you doing, Evie?" "I met Sarah's niece today. We spent the afternoon in the barn talking about Sarah, about Jonathan, about all of it. How was that?" "Healing, actually. Like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together." "Patty, I've been thinking, What if I turned the barn into something positive, something that honors all of it? Sarah the baby, they lost. Jonathan's grief, but also our life together. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet. Maybe a play space for local children or an art studio for kids. Something that brings life back to that space instead of leaving it as a monument to death. That's beautiful, Evie. Jonathan would have loved that idea. After hanging up, Evelyn walked back to the barn with a lantern. The space felt different in the soft light, less like a tomb and more like a chrysalis waiting to transform into something new. She ran her hand along the painted walls, imagining children's laughter filling the space, tiny hands playing with the toys Jonathan had collected. Young voices singing the songs he'd never gotten to share. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A couple in their 70s stood at her door, the woman clutching the man's arm as if for support. "The Amal sisters," Mrs. Carter, were Howard and Dorothy Mitchell, Sarah's parents. Evelyn's breath caught. "Please come in." They moved slowly, age and grief having taken their toll. Once seated in the living room, Dorothy spoke first. "Rebecca called us last night, told us about the barn. We had to come see for ourselves." "Of course. Would you like me to show you?" Howard shook his head. "Not yet. First we need to apologize." "Apologize for what?" Dorothy reached out and took Evelyn's hand. Her skin was paper-thin, marked with age spots, but her grip was firm. "For letting you live with that secret all these years. We knew Jonathan had kept the nursery. We knew because he asked our permission before he bought the property. He said he needed to preserve it, that he couldn't let it be erased like Sarah had never existed." "We should have told you," Howard added, his voice gruff with emotion. "When you two got married, we should have reached out, explained things. But we were cowards. We moved away and tried to pretend it hadn't happened." "You were grieving," Evelyn said gently. "We all do what we need to survive our losses." Dorothy began to cry quietly. "We lost our daughter, but Jonathan lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his future. And then he found you, and we were so grateful. You brought him back to life, gave him a reason to keep going." "He never forgot Sarah," Evelyn said. "But he loved me too. Differently, but truly." "We know," Howard said. "He wrote to us, you know, every year on Sarah's birthday and the anniversary of the accident. Just a card, usually letting us know he was thinking of them. He always mentioned you, how happy you made him, how grateful he was to have found love again." They sat in silence for a moment, three people bound together by loss and love and the complicated legacy of grief. Finally, Dorothy asked, "Could we see it, the barn?" Evelyn led them across the yard, their progress slow but determined. When she opened the barn door and they stepped inside, Dorothy gasped and collapsed against her husband. "The elephants," she whispered. She always loved elephants. Howard helped his wife to the rocking chair, then stood examining the murals with tears streaming down his weathered face. "She designed these. I remember her showing us the sketches. She was so excited about creating a magical world for the baby." They spent an hour in the barn, touching everything with reverent fingers, reading some of Jonathan's letters, sharing memories that each item triggered. Dorothy sang a bit of a lullaby that Sarah had loved, her voice cracked but sweet in the dusty air. "What will you do with it all?" Howard finally asked. Evelyn shared her tentative idea about creating a space for children, and Dorothy's face lit up. Sarah would have loved that. She always said children needed magical spaces, places where imagination could run wild. "Would you help me?" Evelyn asked impulsively. "Design it, I mean. You knew Sarah best knew what she would have wanted." The Mitchells exchanged glances, then Dorothy nodded. "We'd be honored." Over the next several weeks, the barn began to transform. The Mitchells returned several times, bringing photo albums and stories. Rebecca came on weekends, bringing her own two young children who played carefully with some of the toys, while the adults planned and remembered. Tom Morrison and some of the other neighbors, learning about the project, offered to help with renovations. The story spread through the small town, and soon Evelyn had more volunteers than she knew what to do with. Everyone, it seemed, had been touched by the tragedy of Sarah's death, and wanted to be part of creating something positive from the pain. One evening, as Evelyn sorted through donation offers, she found another hidden compartment in the barn, this one behind a loose board near the ceiling. Inside was a single envelope addressed to her in Jonathan's handwriting with a date from just a month before his death. Evelyn, if you're reading this, you found my last secret. I came here one final time after the diagnosis knowing I wouldn't have many more chances. I needed to write this while I still could hold a pen steady. I've been a fool. I see that now when it's too late to fix it. I should have brought you here years ago, should have trusted you with this pain. You would have understood. You always understood me better than I understood myself. I watched you grieve our childlessness, and I couldn't share that I was grieving too. Not just for the children we couldn't have, but for the child I'd already lost. I thought keeping these griefs separate would protect you, but all it did was leave us both alone in our sorrow. You asked me once after another failed treatment if I blamed you. The look in your eyes broke my heart. I said no, and I meant it, but I couldn't explain that I blamed myself, that I felt like I was being punished for surviving when Sarah didn't, for moving on, for being happy with you when she was gone. That was foolish too. Sarah would have wanted me to be happy. She would have loved you, I think. You both had that same way of seeing beauty in ordinary things, of making life feel like an adventure, even when you were just going to the grocery store. I'm dying now, and my biggest regret isn't the cancer or the things I won't get to do. It's the 35 years of honesty I stole from our marriage. You deserve to know all of me, not just the parts I thought were safe to share. But here's what I need you to know every single day: with you was a choice. I chose you not because I couldn't have Sarah, but because you were you. You were never a consolation prize or a second choice. You were my second chance, and I thank God, or the universe, or whatever force brought you into that coffee shop in Nashville on that April morning. The barn is yours now, along with all its ghosts. Do with it what you will, but please don't let it remain a monument to sadness. Find a way to fill it with life again. That's what Sarah would have wanted. It's what I want for you, to take all this accumulated sorrow and transform it into something beautiful. I should have said this in person. I should have said so many things, but I was always better at writing than talking when it came to the things that mattered most. I love you, Evelyn Marie Carter. Thank you for 35 years of patience with a broken man who didn't know how to explain his cracks. Forever and always, Jonathan. Evelyn read the letter 3 times before the tears stopped enough for her to fold it carefully and place it with the others. Outside, she could hear the sound of hammering. Tom and his son had come by to start reinforcing the barn's structure for its new purpose. She walked outside to thank them and found more people had arrived. The Hendersons from the library had brought paint for the touch-ups needed on the murals. The Wilsons had a truck full of lumber for new shelving. Even the mayor had shown up with a box of paperwork about permits and zoning for the children's space. "This is incredible," Evelyn said, overwhelmed by the support. "Jonathan was a good man," Tom said simply. "He helped every person here at one time or another. This is our way of honoring him and Sarah, too." As the sun set, casting golden light through the barn's windows, Evelyn stood surrounded by her community, watching Jonathan's secret sanctuary begin its transformation into something new. The toys would stay, but they would be played with. The books would remain, but they would be read. The murals would be preserved, but they would watch over living children instead of ghostly memories. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn found herself at her computer writing. The words flowed like water breaking through a dam, telling the story of Jonathan and Sarah, of herself, and Jonathan, of how love persists even through loss and secrets and silence. She wrote about the barn and its transformation, about the community coming together, about the strange and beautiful way grief could become gratitude given enough time and understanding. When she finally stopped, dawn was breaking outside her window. She had written over 40 pages, the foundation of what would eventually become a book about love loss and the locks we put on our hearts. She printed the pages and walked to the barn where the morning light was just beginning to illuminate the murals. Sitting in Jonathan's rocking chair, she read aloud to the empty space, sharing the story with the ghosts she now understood were not haunting but healing presences. "This is our story," she said to the painted elephants and fairy tale castles. "All of it, the beautiful and the broken, the spoken and the silent, and now finally it's complete." A week later, the barn held its first event, a soft opening for the families who had helped with the renovation. Children ran through the space, their laughter echoing off the walls that had held only silence for so long. They played with the toys Jonathan had collected, traced their fingers along the murals, listened to stories read from the books he'd saved. Rebecca brought her children, and watching them play with a wooden train set, she said to Evelyn, "They would have been cousins in another life, Sarah's baby and my kids." "In a way they are," Evelyn replied. "This place makes everyone family." Dorothy Mitchell sat in the rocking chair, teaching a group of young children the lullaby she'd sung to Sarah as a baby. Howard stood by the window watching the life fill the space, his weathered face peaceful for the first time since Evelyn had met him. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Word had spread through the town about the barn's story and its transformation. Mothers brought their children, elderly residents came to share their memories of Sarah. Young couples stopped by to see the famous murals they'd heard about. One young woman, heavily pregnant, stood for a long time in front of the elephant mural, tears streaming down her face. "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked gently. "I lost my first baby," the woman whispered. 2 years ago, stillborn. Everyone tells me to focus on this pregnancy, to not dwell on the past. But how do you not dwell on a child you never got to know?" Evelyn put her arm around the woman's shoulders. "You don't forget. You carry them with you always. But you also keep living, keep loving. You honor them by not letting grief be the only thing that defines you." She showed the woman some of Jonathan's letters, the ones where he imagined what his child might have become. He wrote these for 35 years. The grief never went away, but it transformed into something else, a kind of love that exists outside of time. The woman left with a promise to return after her baby was born, to bring new life into the space that honored the ones who didn't make it. As evening approached and the last visitors departed, Evelyn stood alone in the barn. But she didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded by love. Jonathan's love. Sarah's love. The love of their community. The love of all the children who would play here in years to come. She thought about the locked door that had stood between her and Jonathan for so many years, and how its opening had revealed not betrayal, but a depth of feeling she hadn't known existed. She thought about secrets, and how they could both protect and imprison, about grief, and how it could both destroy and create. The brass key that had opened the safety deposit box now hung on a chain around her neck. She'd had it engraved with 3 sets of initials: SM for Sarah Mitchell, JC for Jonathan Carter, and EC for herself. They were all part of this story, now bound together by love and loss and the strange ways life unfolds. That evening, she sat down to write in the journal she'd started keeping. Today, children played in the barn for the first time in 35 years. Their laughter filled spaces that had only known tears. Their small hands touched toys that had waited decades to be loved. The secret that Jonathan kept locked away has become a gift to the community, a place where joy and sorrow can coexist, where memory and hope share the same space. I understand now why he couldn't tell me. Some pain is too large for words, too complex for explanation. But I also understand that keeping it locked away only preserved the pain, like an insect in amber, perfect and unchanging, and ultimately lifeless. By opening the barn, by sharing the story, by letting others in, the pain has begun to transform. It's still there. It will always be there, but it's no longer static. It moves, it breathes. It makes space for other emotions to exist alongside it. Tomorrow, we officially open the barn as the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Play Space. The Mitchells will cut the ribbon, and I'll say a few words about Jonathan, about Sarah, about the baby who was so loved despite never drawing breath. But mostly I'll talk about hope and community and the way love persists through everything, even death, even secrets, even 35 years of locked doors. Jonathan, my dear husband, you thought you were protecting me from your grief, but grief shared is grief diminished, and joy shared is joy doubled. We could have had both if only we'd been brave enough to unlock our hearts along with the barn. But it's not too late. Not really. Your love is still here in every painted elephant, every carefully chosen toy, every letter you wrote to a child who existed only in your dreams. And my love is here too in the decision to transform this space, to honor all of our losses by creating something beautiful and living and free. The barn is open now. The secrets are told. And somehow in the telling, they've lost their power to hurt. What remains is love, complicated, messy, profound love that transcends time and death and even understanding. Rest well, my darling Jonathan. Rest well, dear Sarah. Rest well, little one who never was. Your story lives on not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the human heart's infinite capacity to love, to grieve, and ultimately to heal. The morning of the official opening dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect autumn days that made the Tennessee hills look like they'd been painted in watercolors. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun climb over the horizon, wearing the simple black dress she'd worn to Jonathan's funeral just 2 months ago. But today she'd added a splash of color. Sarah's favorite scarf, according to Dorothy, a silk piece covered in tiny elephants that Rebecca had found in her father's belongings, and insisted Evelyn have. The barn had been transformed over the past weeks. Tom Morrison and his crew had reinforced the structure, installed proper ventilation, and added safety features required for a public space. The murals had been sealed with a protective coating that would preserve them for generations. New shelving displayed the books Jonathan had collected, now organized by age group. The toys had been cleaned and sorted, waiting in bright bins for small hands to discover them. But perhaps the most significant addition was the memorial wall near the entrance. 3 photographs hung there, Sarah in her nurse's uniform smiling brightly, Jonathan from their wedding day looking at Evelyn with unmistakable love, and the ultrasound image Evelyn had found tucked in one of Jonathan's notebooks, the only picture that existed of the baby who never was. Beneath the photos, a plaque read, "This space is dedicated to all the children who live in our hearts, but not in our arms, and to the parents who carry them forever. May laughter fill these walls and heal the silence." The doorbell rang, pulling Evelyn from her reverie. She found Margaret Henderson on her porch holding a large box. "These are from the library's old children's section," Margaret said, slightly out of breath. "Books that were Sarah's favorites when she was little. I've been saving them all these years, not knowing why. Now I do." Evelyn accepted the box, gratefully touched by yet another thread connecting past to present. As she set it down, she noticed a familiar car pulling up her sister Patricia, whom she hadn't expected until afternoon. "Patty, you're early." Patricia emerged from the car along with someone Evelyn didn't recognize, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Evie, this is Dr. James Whitfield," Patricia said. "He's a child psychologist from Nashville. I thought he might be helpful today." Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, offering his hand. "Your sister told me about what you're doing here. I specialize in childhood grief and loss. I'd be honored to be part of this, perhaps offer some guidance on how to make the space therapeutic as well as playful." "But also," Patricia interjected, "James lost his daughter when she was 3. Leukemia. It's been 20 years, but he understands, Evie. He really understands." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as she shook Dr. Whitfield's hand. "Thank you for coming, both of you." As the morning progressed, more people arrived early to help with final preparations. The Methodist Church choir, which Sarah had belonged to, came to practice the songs they'd perform. Local newspaper reporters set up their cameras, having gotten wind of the story. Even the state representative had sent an aide with a proclamation declaring it Sarah Mitchell Day in the county. Evelyn was arranging the last of the flowers when she heard a tentative voice behind her. "Mrs. Carter." She turned to find a young couple, the woman holding an infant, the man carrying a toddler who was hiding his face in his father's shoulder. "We're the Johnsons. We just moved to town last month. We heard about what you're doing here, and—" The woman paused, shifting the baby in her arms. "We lost our middle child, stillborn between these two. We haven't really known how to help our older son understand why his brother isn't here." "What's your son's name?" Evelyn asked gently. "Timothy. He's 3. Evelyn knelt down to Timothy's level. "Timothy, would you like to see something magical?" The boy peeked out from his father's shoulder, curious, despite his shyness. Evelyn led them to a corner of the barn where Jonathan had painted a particularly whimsical scene, a dragon and a knight who appeared to be having tea together instead of fighting. "Sometimes," Evelyn said to Timothy, "people we love have to go on adventures where we can't follow them yet. But that doesn't mean they're not still part of our story." She pulled out one of the books Jonathan had bought, a beautifully illustrated tale about stars being lights that loved ones shine down from heaven. "Would you like me to read this to you?" As she read, Timothy gradually relaxed, eventually sliding down from his father's arms to sit beside her. Other early arrivals gathered around, listening to the story that seemed to speak to everyone who'd lost someone too soon. When she finished, Timothy looked up at her with solemn eyes. "My brother is on an adventure." "The biggest adventure of all," Evelyn confirmed. "And someday, when you're very old, you'll get to hear all about it." Dr. Whitfield, who had been observing quietly, approached afterward. "That was beautifully handled. You have a natural gift for this." "I've had 35 years to think about loss," Evelyn replied, "though I'm only now learning how to talk about it." By noon, the crowd had grown beyond anything Evelyn had anticipated. It seemed the entire town had turned out, along with people from neighboring communities who'd heard the story. The yard was full of families, children running between the adults' legs, elderly residents sharing memories on benches Tom had built. Dorothy and Howard Mitchell arrived in their Sunday best, Dorothy clutching a small wrapped package. "This was Sarah's," she said, handing it to Evelyn. "Her stethoscope from nursing school. We thought it should be here in the barn. Maybe some child playing doctor will use it and decide to become a healer like she was." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 1 o'clock. As the time approached, Evelyn found herself overwhelmed by the crowd, the noise, the sheer life that had invaded what had been a silent space for so long. She slipped away, needing a moment alone, and found herself in the small grove of trees behind the barn where Jonathan had built a bench years ago. She wasn't alone for long. Rebecca found her there, bringing a cup of tea. "It's a lot," Rebecca said simply, sitting beside her. "I keep thinking about Jonathan, wondering what he'd make of all this. He kept it secret for so long, and now the whole county knows." "Do you regret opening it up?" Evelyn considered the question. "No, but I understand why he couldn't. Everyone grieves differently. His way was silence and solitude. Mine, I'm discovering, is community and sharing." "Sarah was like you," Rebecca said. "She would have wanted this, the barn full of children, the community coming together. In a way, you're completing what she started." They sat in comfortable silence until Tom appeared, tapping his watch. "It's time, Evelyn." The crowd had arranged itself in a semicircle around the barn's entrance. The Methodist choir stood to one side, the local officials to the other. Dorothy and Howard were given the scissors for the ribbon, but Dorothy pressed them into Evelyn's hands. "You should do it," she said. "You're the one who unlocked the door." "We'll do it together," Evelyn suggested, and the three of them, widow and bereaved parents, cut the ribbon as one. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Children surged forward, eager to explore the space they'd been hearing about. Parents followed more slowly, many wiping away tears as they saw the murals, understood the story, felt the weight of love and loss that permeated the space. Evelyn had prepared a speech, but standing there watching children play with toys Jonathan had chosen, hearing their laughter echo off walls that had held only silence, she forgot every word. Instead, she spoke from her heart. "Jonathan kept this barn locked for 35 years, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Not out of cruelty or secrecy, but out of a grief too large to share. Sarah Mitchell died carrying their child in 1987, and Jonathan spent the rest of his life building a monument to the family that never was." She paused, looking at the faces turned toward her, some she'd known for decades, others were strangers drawn by the story. "When I discovered this after his death, I had a choice. I could have been angry about the secret. I could have cleared it all out, sold everything, pretended it never existed. But that would have been another kind of silence, another locked door. Instead, with the help of all of you, we've transformed this space from a monument to loss into a celebration of love. Love that persists despite death, despite time, despite everything that tries to diminish it." She found Dr. Whitfield in the crowd, his understanding eyes encouraging her to continue. "This barn is for all of us who've loved and lost. It's for the children who are here and the ones who aren't. It's for the parents who carry grief alongside joy, who know that the heart is vast enough to hold both. It's for the community that understands sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to serve the living." The choir began to sing, then an old hymn about joy coming in the morning, and Evelyn stepped back as children and parents flooded into the barn. She watched from the doorway as Timothy Johnson discovered the train, set his face lighting up with wonder. She saw Dorothy teaching a group of children the finger games Sarah had loved. She observed Dr. Whitfield speaking quietly with parents who'd lost children, offering his card, offering hope. It's she, Mrs. Carter." A woman Evelyn didn't recognize approached middle-aged wearing a business suit that looked out of place among the casual crowd. "I'm Jennifer Hartley from the Tennessee Children's Foundation. We've heard about what you're doing here, and we'd like to discuss funding to replicate this model in other communities." Replicate it. Grief play spaces. Safe places where families dealing with loss can come together, where children can play while parents find support. Your barn could be the prototype for a statewide, maybe even national program. Evelyn felt dizzy at the scope of what the woman was suggesting. "I'd need to think about it. This is all so new." "Of course, here's my card, take your time. But what you've created here, it's special, it's needed." As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn found herself pulled in different directions, answering questions from reporters, comforting grieving parents, watching children play. But repeatedly, her eyes were drawn to one corner of the barn, where a little girl, maybe 5 years old, had discovered Jonathan's guitar. The child was strumming it randomly, creating a discordant but somehow beautiful sound. Her mother started to stop her, but Evelyn intervened. "It's all right. It's meant to be played." "But it might get damaged," the mother protested. "Then we'll fix it, or get another one. The silence has done more damage than any child ever could." She sat down beside the little girl. "Would you like to learn a song?" The child nodded eagerly, and Evelyn positioned her small fingers on the strings, teaching her a simple chord. Soon other children gathered around, wanting their turn. Evelyn found herself giving an impromptu music lesson using the lullabies Jonathan had written but never sung. Patricia appeared at her elbow during a break. "You look happy, Evie. Really happy. For the first time since Jonathan died." "I feel like I finally understand him," Evelyn replied. "All those years I thought his distance was about me, about some failing on my part. But it was never about me. It was about a grief so profound he couldn't figure out how to share it without drowning us both. And now the grief has air and light and space to transform into something else. It's still there, it always will be, but it's not trapped anymore." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the barn's windows, just as it had on that first day when Evelyn had discovered the truth, people slowly began to leave. Parents carried sleeping children to cars. The elderly residents accepted rides home. The reporters packed up their equipment, having gotten their story about the barn that love built. Finally, only the core group remained: the Mitchells, Rebecca and her family, Tom Morrison, Patricia, Dr. Whitfield, and Evelyn. They sat in a circle on the floor of the barn, sharing a bottle of wine Tom had brought, telling stories about Jonathan and Sarah and the strange paths that had brought them all together. "I have something to say," Howard Mitchell announced suddenly. He'd been quiet most of the day, letting his wife do the talking, but now he stood raising his plastic cup of wine. "For 35 years I hated Jonathan Carter. I blamed him for Sarah's death. If he hadn't gotten her pregnant, if he hadn't let her drive that night, if he'd been somehow different, maybe she'd still be alive." Dorothy reached for his hand, but he continued. "When I saw what he'd built here, what he'd preserved, I realized I'd been hating a man who was grieving just as hard as I was. Maybe harder because he had to carry on, had to build a new life, had to pretend he was whole when half of him was buried with my daughter." He looked directly at Evelyn. "Thank you for opening this door. Thank you for showing us that Jonathan never forgot, never moved on, never stopped loving our little girl. And thank you for loving him through his brokenness, for giving him 35 years of happiness he might not have had otherwise." Evelyn felt tears sliding down her face as Howard raised his cup higher. To Jonathan and Sarah and the baby who was so loved. To Evelyn and the courage to unlock doors. To all of us who've learned that grief shared is grief transformed. They drank, and in the silence that followed, a child's laughter echoed from outside one of the neighbor's kids playing in the yard. It was the perfect sound Evelyn thought the sound the barn had been waiting 35 years to hear. Dr. Whitfield was the first to leave, but not before pulling Evelyn aside. "I'd like to volunteer here if you'll have me. Run a support group for grieving parents maybe, use play therapy with children dealing with loss." "I'd like that," Evelyn said. "Jonathan would have liked it too. He just never knew how to ask for help." "Most of us don't," Dr. Whitfield replied. "That's why spaces like this are so important. They make it easier to reach out when we're drowning." After everyone had gone, Evelyn stood alone in the barn one last time. Tomorrow it would open to the public on a regular schedule. Volunteers had signed up to supervise play sessions. Parents had already reserved the space for birthday parties, celebrating life in a place that honored death. The transformation was complete. But tonight it was just her and the ghosts, but they didn't feel like ghosts anymore. They felt like guides, like the love that had created this space was still present, blessing its new purpose. She found Jonathan's final notebook, the one where he'd written letters to her he'd never sent. She'd been saving it, afraid of what she might find. Now in the peace of the evening, she opened it. The first entry was dated just after their wedding, Dear Evelyn. Today you became my wife, and I felt something I didn't think I'd feel again, hope. Not the wild, boundless hope I had with Sarah, but something quieter, steadier. A hope that maybe broken people can build something beautiful together. I almost told you about her today, about the barn, about everything. But you looked so happy, and I couldn't bear to dim that light with my darkness. She read on entry after entry, year after year. Jonathan had written to her after every significant moment, anniversaries, failed fertility treatments, vacations. Ordinary Tuesday mornings when something she'd said or done had touched him deeply. It was their entire marriage, from his perspective, filtered through a grief she hadn't known existed. The final entry was dated the day before he'd been hospitalized for the last time. Dearest Evelyn, the cancer is winning and soon I'll be gone. I should have unlocked the barn years ago. I should have trusted you with my whole heart, not just the parts I thought were presentable. You deserve better than a husband who was half ghost. But here's what I need you to know. The half that was present, that was real, that loved you, that was the best half. The half that learned to laugh again because of your joy. The half that found peace in your arms. The half that discovered that a heart can be simultaneously broken and whole. If you're reading this in the barn surrounded by the evidence of my first love, please know that it doesn't diminish my second. Sarah was my youth, my innocence, my belief that life was predictable and fair. You were my maturity, my wisdom, my understanding that life is chaos and loss and unexpected grace all mixed together. I'm going to die without ever telling you this in person because I'm a coward. But I'm also going to die knowing that I was loved twice in one lifetime, which is more than most people get. Thank you for loving me despite the locked doors. Thank you for 35 years of patience with a man who didn't know how to be whole. The barn is my confession and my gift. Do with it what you will. But know that every toy I bought, I imagined your hands placing it in a child's arms. Every book I chose, I heard your voice reading it aloud. Every letter I wrote to the child who never was, I was also writing to the children we never had. This grief was ours even if I couldn't share it. This love is ours even if I couldn't speak it. Forever. Your devoted husband, Jonathan. P.S. I know you'll transform this space into something wonderful. You always did know how to bring light into dark places. You brought light into me. Evelyn closed the notebook and held it to her chest. Outside stars were beginning to appear in the darkening skylights from heaven, as the children's book had said. She thought about Timothy Johnson and his brother on an adventure. She thought about Sarah and her baby, about all the children who lived in hearts, but not in arms. Thank you, Jonathan, she said to the empty barn. Thank you for the locked door, and thank you for the key. Thank you for protecting me, and thank you for the truth. Thank you for 35 years, and thank you for this. She turned off the lights and locked the barn. Not to keep people out, but to keep it safe until tomorrow when it would open again. When children would play. When parents would find comfort. When the community would gather to transform grief into something bearable, even beautiful. Walking back to the house, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since Jonathan's death, anticipation for tomorrow. The barn was no longer an ending, but a beginning. The secret was no longer a burden, but a gift. The lock had been broken, and what had been released wasn't darkness, but light. In the kitchen, she found a message on her answering machine from Jennifer Hartley at the Children's Foundation reiterating their interest in the grief play space model. There was another from a publisher friend of Patricia's interested in the book Evelyn had started writing. A third from Dr. Whitfield thanking her for the inspiration and confirming his volunteer schedule. Life was moving forward, carrying her with it. But now she understood that moving forward didn't mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying it with you, transformed and integrated part of the story, but not the whole story. She made herself tea and sat at the kitchen table where she'd read Jonathan's first letter, where she'd found the photograph of him with Sarah, where she'd made the decision to cut the lock. The brass key still hung around her neck, warm against her skin. Tomorrow she would return it to the safety deposit box along with Jonathan's notebooks and Sarah's diary. They belonged in a safe place, preserved but not enshrined. The phone rang, Rebecca calling to say goodnight and to thank her again. "My children haven't stopped talking about the barn," Rebecca said. "They want to know when they can go back." "It'll be open every Saturday and Sunday afternoon and Wednesday evenings," Evelyn replied. "But they're welcome anytime. You all are." "Aunt Sarah would have loved you," Rebecca said softly. "I know that might be strange to hear, but I think it's true." "I think I would have loved her too," Evelyn admitted. Jonathan had excellent taste in women. They laughed together, a sound that would have been impossible just months ago. Grief had brought them together, but something more than grief would keep them connected. After hanging up, Evelyn walked through her empty house. It didn't feel empty anymore, though. It felt full of possibility. She'd been thinking about offering the spare rooms to foster children, teenagers who needed a safe place to land. The barn could be their playground, their therapy space, their magical world, just as Jonathan had imagined for his own child. She climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Jonathan, still wearing Sarah's elephant scarf. Tomorrow she would return it to Dorothy, but tonight it felt right to wear it to carry both women's stories with her. The first foster child arrived 3 months later on a cold February morning, when frost still clung to the barn's windows like delicate lace. Evelyn stood at the door watching the social worker's car pull up the gravel drive, her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and terror she hadn't felt since her wedding day. Marcus was 15, all sharp angles and defensive posture, with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. He climbed out of the car, clutching a garbage bag that contained everything he owned, his jaw set in a way that dared the world to hurt him again. "Mrs. Carter, this is Marcus," the social worker Anne said with professional brightness that didn't quite mask her exhaustion. "Marcus, Mrs. Carter is going to be your foster mother." "It's Evelyn," she said gently, extending her hand. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before shaking it briefly, his grip deliberately limp. "Where's my room?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll show you. Would you like to see the barn first? I'm tired," Marcus cut her off. "Just the room." Evelyn exchanged glances with Anne, who gave her an encouraging nod. They'd discussed Marcus's history, abandoned by his mother, at 7, bounced through 8 foster homes in 8 years, most recently expelled from a group home for fighting. He was angry, wounded, and absolutely determined not to form any attachments that could hurt him again. She led him upstairs to the room she'd prepared, the one that had been meant for a nursery 35 years ago, when she and Jonathan had first tried to conceive. She'd painted it a neutral blue, bought simple furniture, left the walls bare so Marcus could decorate them himself if he chose. Marcus stood in the doorway, scanning the space like he was memorizing exits. "Lock on the door." "No locks on bedroom doors in this house," Evelyn said. "But I respect privacy. I'll always knock." He grunted, tossed his garbage bag on the bed, and turned his back to her. Message received. After Anne left with promises to check in next week. Evelyn stood in her kitchen wondering what she'd gotten herself into. She could hear Marcus moving around upstairs, the old floorboards creaking under his weight. She'd thought she was ready for this, had taken all the classes, read all the books. But faced with the reality of this wounded child, because that's what he was, despite his size and attitude, just a child, she felt wholly unprepared. The barn had continued to thrive through the winter months. Dr. Whitfield's support groups met twice a week, and families came from 3 counties away to use the space. Just last week, a mother who'd lost twins to a drunk driver had brought her surviving daughter to play, and watching that little girl laugh for the first time in months had reminded Evelyn why she'd opened the barn in the first place. But Marcus wasn't a grieving parent or a small child who could be comforted with stories and toys. He was a teenager who'd learned that love was just another word for abandonment, that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. That evening she called him down for dinner. He appeared in the doorway, hovering like he might bolt at any moment. "I made lasagna," she said. "Jonathan's my late husband's recipe. He was a much better cook than me, but I've gotten pretty good at this one dish." Marcus sat at the table but didn't speak. He ate mechanically steadily like someone who'd learned not to count on regular meals. Evelyn tried a few conversation starters, school music, sports, but got only shrugs and monosyllables in response. Finally, she stopped trying, and they ate in silence. Not comfortable silence, but not hostile either. Just the quiet of two strangers learning to exist in the same space. After dinner, Marcus started to disappear back upstairs, but Evelyn called out, "There's something I want to show you." "I'm tired," he said again, his default excuse. "It'll just take a minute." She led him out to the barn, unlocking it with the key she now wore on a simple chain. The space was dark and quiet, transformed in the absence of children's laughter. She flicked on the lights, illuminating the murals, the toys, the books, the rocking chair where she'd spent so many hours reading Jonathan's letters. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. "What is this place?" Evelyn told him, the story abbreviated, simplified but honest, about Jonathan and Sarah, about the baby who never was, about 35 years of locked doors and hidden grief, about transformation and community and the strange ways pain could become purpose. "This is messed up," Marcus said when she finished, but there was something different in his voice. Not judgment exactly, but recognition. "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "It is. Life is messed up sometimes. People keep secrets, they leave, they die, they hurt each other without meaning to. But sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to make something beautiful out of the mess." Marcus walked deeper into the barn, running his fingers along the painted walls. He stopped at the memorial wall, staring at the photographs of Sarah and Jonathan and the ultrasound image. "My mom kept a picture of me as a baby," he said suddenly, "in her wallet. Even after she left me at the fire station, they found it in her things when she OD'd. The cops gave it to me. I don't know why she kept it if she didn't want me." "Maybe," Evelyn said carefully, "she wanted you, but couldn't keep you. Sometimes love and ability don't match up. Sometimes people love us the only way they can, even if it's not the way we need." Marcus turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw past his armor to the frightened, furious child underneath. "That's bullshit. If you love someone, you stay. Jonathan stayed, and he still kept this whole barn a secret from me. Was that love or betrayal?" "Both," Marcus said without hesitation. Exactly. Both. Most things are both." They stood in silence for a moment before Marcus asked, "Do you actually let kids play in here with all this sad ghost stuff?" "Every weekend, and Wednesday evenings. You can help supervise if you want. Some of the younger kids could use a big brother figure." Marcus snorted. "I'm nobody's role model, lady." "Evelyn," she corrected, "and you'd be surprised. Sometimes the best guides are the ones who know how rough the path can be." Over the next weeks, Marcus settled into a routine. He went to school, the local high school, where everyone knew everyone and newcomers were instant celebrities. He came home, did his homework at the kitchen table while Evelyn prepared dinner. He spoke in sentences now, sometimes even paragraphs, though he still flinched when she moved too quickly or laughed too loudly. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon in March. The barn was full of families, and Evelyn was reading to a group of younger children when she noticed Marcus standing in the doorway. He'd been avoiding the barn during open hours, claiming he had homework or was tired or had plans with the friends he hadn't made yet. But today he was there watching a little boy, maybe 6 years old, sitting alone in a corner clutching a stuffed elephant and crying silently. Before Evelyn could excuse herself from the story, Marcus was moving. He sat down next to the boy, not touching, just present. "Cool elephant," Marcus said. The boy looked up, tears streaming down his face. "My sister had one like it. She died." "That sucks," Marcus said simply. The boy's eyes widened. Adults never said things like that. They said, "I'm sorry," or "she's in a better place," or "everything happens for a reason." They didn't say the truth that it sucked. "Yeah," the boy whispered. "It really sucks." "What was her name?" "Emma. She was 4. Leukemia." Marcus nodded. "My mom's name was Crystal. She died too. Drugs." "Did you love her?" "Yeah, even though she left me, still loved her." "I was mad at Emma for dying," the boy confessed. "Mom says that's bad." "Nah," Marcus said. "Being mad is normal. I was mad at Crystal for years, still am sometimes, but also sad. And also other stuff that doesn't have words. Evelyn watched this interaction from across the barn, her heart swelling. Marcus, who'd built walls so high and thick that professional therapists couldn't penetrate them, was connecting with this grieving child in a way that no adult could. Dr. Whitfield appeared beside her. That's remarkable. Has he had training in grief counseling? No, Evelyn said softly. He's just had training in grief. From that day forward, Marcus became a fixture in the barn during open hours. He had a gift for identifying the children who were struggling most, the ones hiding in corners, or acting out, or sitting silent while their parents talked in the support groups. He didn't try to fix them or comfort them in traditional ways. He just sat with them, shared his own losses matter-of-factly, and somehow made them feel less alone. One evening, as they cleaned up after a particularly busy session, Marcus said, "This place is weird." "How so?" "It's like everyone here has a hole in them, where someone used to be, but instead of trying to fill it or pretend it's not there, everyone just admits it's there, and somehow that makes it hurt less." "Jonathan spent 35 years pretending the hole wasn't there," Evelyn said. "It didn't make it hurt less, it just made him hurt alone." "Is that why you took me in to fill your hole?" The question was deliberately provocative testing. Evelyn had learned not to rise to Marcus's bait, but to answer honestly. "Partly," she admitted. "I wanted children with Jonathan. We couldn't have them. Then I found out about the child he lost, and I realized we were both grieving something that never got to exist. So yes, you're here partly because I wanted to be a mother. But you're not a replacement for anything, Marcus. You're not filling a hole. You're adding to the structure, making it bigger, more complex." That's a weird way to put it. "I'm a weird lady who lives with a barn full of ghost toys." Marcus laughed, actually laughed for the first time since he'd arrived. "Yeah, you really are." Spring arrived with dogwood blossoms and warm rain. The barn's schedule expanded to 4 days a week, with volunteer staff taking shifts. Rebecca had become a regular, bringing her children, but also helping to organize events. The Mitchells came every Sunday, Dorothy teaching crafts, while Howard repaired toys and maintained the building. One April afternoon, Evelyn received an unexpected call from Jennifer Hartley at the Children's Foundation. "We've had a situation arise," Jennifer said. "There's a little girl, Lucy, age 7. She lost both parents in a car accident 3 months ago. She's been with an aunt, but the aunt is elderly and can't manage. She's gone completely nonverbal since the accident. We've tried therapy, but she won't engage. Someone suggested your barn." "Of course, bring her anytime." "Well, that's the thing. The aunt lives in Memphis. It would be a 2-hour drive each way. We were wondering, I know you have Marcus now, but would you consider taking Lucy too? Even temporarily, being near the barn might help her." Evelyn looked out the window to where Marcus was shooting baskets at the hoop Tom Morrison had installed. He'd grown 2 inches in the 3 months he'd been with her, was filling out, looking less like a scared animal and more like the young man he was becoming. "I'll need to talk to Marcus," she said. "This affects him too." That evening, she presented the situation to Marcus over dinner. He listened without interrupting, then asked, "Is she broken? Like really broken?" "She's grieving, traumatized. She hasn't spoken a word since the accident." "And you think the magic barn will fix her?" There was no sarcasm in his tone, just curiosity. "I think being around other kids who understand loss might help. And having a big brother figure who gets it." Marcus pushed his green beans around his plate. "I'm not good with little kids. You're excellent with them. I've watched you. Those kids in the barn, they leave after an hour. This one would be here all the time." "Yes. What if she never talks? What if she's like permanently broken? Then she'll be permanently broken and still need a safe place to live." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I had a foster sister once, when I was 10. She was 4, wouldn't eat, just refused. The foster parents got frustrated, sent her back. I always wondered what happened to her." "What was her name?" "Destiny. Stupid name for a kid nobody wanted." "You wanted her." Marcus shrugged. "I tried to get her to eat, made airplane noises with the spoon and stuff. Didn't work, but I tried. That's all any of us can do. Try." "Fine. But if she's annoying, I'm not babysitting." Lucy arrived on a Tuesday clutching a teddy bear that had seen better days and a notebook she wouldn't let anyone touch. She was tiny for 7, with huge brown eyes that seemed to take in everything while giving nothing back. The social worker explained that Lucy had been in the car when her parents died trapped for 2 hours before rescue came. She hadn't made a sound since not crying, not screaming, nothing. Marcus was at school when Lucy arrived, and Evelyn was grateful for the time to settle the little girl in without an audience. She showed Lucy to the small bedroom next to Marcus's, the one that had been Jonathan's office. She decorated it quickly but thoughtfully soft colors, a bookshelf full of children's books, a window seat that looked out toward the barn. Lucy stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. Then she walked to the window seat and curled up there, clutching her bear and her notebook, staring out at the barn. "Would you like to see inside the barn?" Evelyn asked gently. Lucy didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge she'd heard. But when Evelyn started walking toward the door, Lucy followed, staying exactly 3 feet behind like she'd measured the distance and found it safe. The barn was empty on Tuesday afternoons, quiet and still. Lucy walked the perimeter first, studying everything with those enormous eyes. She stopped at the memorial wall, staring at the photographs for a long time. Then she moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines, but not pulling any out. Finally, she settled in a corner near the dragon, and Night Mural opened her notebook and began to draw. Evelyn sat nearby, not too close, and pulled out her own notebook, the one where she'd been writing the story of the barn of Jonathan and Sarah, of all the families who'd found solace here. They sat in companionable silence until they heard Marcus's bus rumble up the drive. Lucy's head snapped up, her body tensing. Evelyn saw fear flash across her face, fear of the unknown, of another loss, of caring about someone who might leave. "That's Marcus," Evelyn said softly. "He lives here too. He's 15. His mom died when he was younger than you." Lucy clutched her notebook tighter, but didn't move from her corner. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared in the barn doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at Lucy, then at Evelyn, then back at Lucy. "Hey," he said simply. Then walked over and sat down about 6 feet from Lucy, pulling out his own homework. "Math sucks," he announced to no one in particular. "Who needs algebra anyway?" Lucy watched him struggle with a problem for a few minutes, then did something unexpected. She tore a page from her notebook and pushed it toward him. On it, she'd drawn the problem worked out correctly in surprisingly neat numbers for a 7-year-old. Marcus looked at the paper, then at Lucy. "You're 7 and you can do algebra." Lucy nodded, the first responsive gesture she'd made. "That's weird. Cool, but weird. Can you do this one too?" And so began an odd friendship. Lucy would help Marcus with his math homework. They discovered something of a mathematical prodigy, and Marcus would sit with her during barn hours, translating her drawings and gestures to other children when needed. Lucy remained nonverbal, but she began to communicate through her drawings and occasional gestures. Her notebook became her voice, filled with intricate drawings that told stories she couldn't speak. She drew her parents' often stick figures at first, then increasingly detailed portraits. She drew the car accident too, over and over, each version slightly different, as if she was trying to find the version where everyone survived. Dr. Whitfield, who'd started coming by the house to work with Lucy, was amazed by her progress. "She's processing through art," he told Evelyn. "It's actually quite sophisticated, and her bond with Marcus is remarkable. He seems to understand her in a way that trained therapists don't." "They speak the same language," Evelyn observed. "The language of loss." One evening in May, as thunderstorms rolled across Tennessee, the power went out. They lit candles and gathered in the living room, Marcus attempting to teach Lucy card games by candlelight, while Evelyn made shadow puppets on the wall. In the flickering light, they looked like any other family, makeshift, imperfect, but real. The storm grew fiercer, and Lucy began to shake. Storms had been hard for her since the accident, the sound of rain on metal too reminiscent of that night. Marcus, without being asked, moved closer to her, not touching, but present. "Want to hear about the time I got stuck in a drainage pipe during a storm?" he asked. "I was 8, thought I was being smart, hiding from the rain. Fire department had to pull me out, made the news and everything. Stupid kid gets stuck in pipe. My foster parents were so mad." Lucy's shaking lessened slightly. She pulled out her notebook and drew a quick sketch, a boy stuck in a pipe with his legs sticking out comically. Marcus laughed. "Yeah, exactly like that. I looked like an idiot." The lights flickered back on just as Lucy did something none of them expected. She giggled. Not a full laugh, just a small sound, but it was the first vocalization she'd made in 4 months. Marcus and Evelyn exchanged glances over Lucy's head, both afraid to acknowledge what had just happened in case it spooked her back into silence. But Lucy seemed unaware of the momentousness of the moment, already drawing another picture, this one of Marcus, with his head stuck in various objects: a bucket, a fence, a basketball hoop. That night, after both kids were asleep, Evelyn sat in the barn alone, writing in her journal by lamplight. The space felt alive around her, filled with the energy of all the children who'd played here, all the parents who'd grieved here, all the healing that had happened within these walls. She thought about Jonathan, about the 35 years he'd spent visiting this space alone, pouring his grief into letters to a child who never existed. She wondered what he would think of Marcus and Lucy, of the way his secret sanctuary had become a public haven, of how his hidden sorrow had transformed into visible hope. A sound made her look up. Lucy stood in the doorway barefoot and clutching her teddy bear. She'd never come to the barn alone before, especially not at night. Evelyn waited, not wanting to spook her. Lucy walked slowly to the memorial wall, stared at the photographs for a long moment, then pulled something from behind her back, a drawing she'd torn from her notebook. She placed it carefully beneath the photos and stepped back. Evelyn moved closer to see. It was a drawing of 2 figures clearly meant to be Lucy's parents, standing with Sarah and the baby who'd never been born. Above them all, Lucy had drawn stars, hundreds of tiny stars, connected by delicate lines, like a constellation of lost loves. "That's beautiful, Lucy," Evelyn whispered. Lucy turned to her, and for the first time since arriving, she made deliberate eye contact. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was fighting to speak. Evelyn could see it fighting against months of silence. Finally, in a voice rusty from disuse, Lucy whispered, "They're together." "Yes," Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face. "They're all together." Lucy nodded, seemingly satisfied, and reached for Evelyn's hand. They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the evidence of loss transformed into love, until Lucy yawned and Evelyn carried her back to the house. Marcus was standing at the top of the stairs, having heard them come in. "She okay?" "She spoke," Evelyn told him quietly. "Just 3 words, but she spoke." Marcus's tough guy facade cracked for a moment, revealing genuine joy. "That's good. That's really good." "Yes, it is." As Evelyn tucked Lucy back into bed, the little girl grabbed her hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Always," Evelyn promised, settling into the chair beside Lucy's bed. Through the window she could see the barn silhouetted against the clearing night sky. Tomorrow it would fill again with children and parents, with laughter and tears, with the ongoing work of transforming grief into something bearable. But tonight it stood as a monument to the strange and beautiful truth that love persists through everything, through death, through decades, through locked doors and broken hearts. She thought of Jonathan's letters, of Sarah's diary, of all the words written to capture and contain loss. But sitting there holding Lucy's hand while the child drifted back to sleep, listening to Marcus moving around in his room next door, Evelyn understood that the real story wasn't in the words at all. It was in the spaces between them, in the silence that slowly filled with possibility, in the locked doors that eventually opened to reveal not just pain, but promise. The barn had been Jonathan's secret for 35 years. Now it was the opposite of a secret. It was a beacon drawing broken people together, offering them a place to be broken without shame, to heal without hurry, to discover that the heart's capacity for love actually expands with loss rather than diminishing. As Lucy's breathing deepened into sleep, Evelyn heard Marcus's door open. He patted over in his socks, peering into Lucy's room. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked quietly. "I think so. Are you—" Marcus considered this. Yeah, I think maybe I am." He hesitated, then added, "Thanks for taking us in, for being weird enough to think 2 messed up kids belonged in a house with a ghost barn." "You're not messed up," Evelyn said. "You're just human. We're all walking around with our losses, Marcus. The lucky ones find other people who understand." Marcus nodded and headed back to his room, pausing at his door. "Evelyn, do you think Jonathan would have liked us, me and Lucy?" Evelyn thought about her husband, about his infinite capacity for love, that he'd hidden so carefully about the children he'd imagined for 35 years. He would have loved you both, she said with absolute certainty. He spent 35 years preparing a place for you. He just didn't know it. Marcus smiled a real smile, unguarded and young, and disappeared into his room. Evelyn sat in the chair beside Lucy's bed a while longer, watching the child sleep, thinking about the strange paths that had led them all here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lucy still had months of therapy ahead. Marcus still struggled with trust, and Evelyn was still learning how to be a mother to children who'd learned too young that mothers could leave. But tonight in this house that had held so many secrets, they were together. Three people who'd lost everything, finding something new in each other. It wasn't the family any of them had planned, but it was the family they'd found, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. Summer arrived with a vengeance that year, the Tennessee heat shimmering off the gravel drive like water. Lucy had been speaking more frequently, though still in whispers and short phrases, her voice growing stronger with each passing week. Marcus had finished his sophomore year with better grades than he'd ever achieved, and Evelyn had begun the legal process to formally adopt both children, a decision that had come to her not as a thunderbolt, but as a quiet certainty, like morning light gradually filling a room. The barn had become something of a regional phenomenon. A news crew from Nashville had done a feature story that went viral, and now families drove from as far as Kentucky and Alabama to visit the space where grief was transformed into community. But with growth came complications Evelyn hadn't anticipated. On a sweltering July morning, she stood in the barn with Jennifer Hartley from the Children's Foundation and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Richard Blackwood, a developer from Atlanta. Tawasman. Mrs. Carter. Blackwood said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. What you've created here is remarkable, truly, which is why I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. The barn isn't for sale, Evelyn said immediately. Everything's for sale at the right price. I'm talking about franchising your concept healing barns across the Southeast. We'd maintain the memorial aspect, of course, but add retail spaces, cafes, perhaps even small hotels for families traveling to visit. Think of how many more people we could help. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. This isn't a business, Mr. Blackwood. It's a memorial. It's a community space. It's a gold mine of untapped potential, he interrupted. Your husband kept this locked for 35 years. Don't you think he'd want his story to help as many people as possible? The mention of Jonathan made Evelyn's hands clench. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway, Lucy beside him. They'd been picking blackberries in the woods behind the barn, their fingers stained purple. Everything okay? Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing as he took in Blackwood's suit, his gleaming shoes inappropriate for a barn, his predatory smile. Mr. Blackwood was just leaving, Evelyn said firmly. Blackwood pulled out a business card, pressing it into Evelyn's hand. Think about it. Your husband was a businessman, wasn't he? Ran that hardware store for decades. He'd understand the value of expansion. After he left, Jennifer apologized profusely. I had no idea he was going to ambush you like that. He contacted the foundation, said he was interested in donating. I should have vetted him better. It's fine, Evelyn said, though her hands were still shaking slightly. But this is exactly what I don't want for the barn to become some commercialized grief theme park. Lucy tugged on Evelyn's shirt and held up her notebook. She'd drawn Blackwood as a cartoon villain with dollar signs for eyes being chased away by a dragon that looked suspiciously like Marcus. That's exactly right, sweetheart, Evelyn said, and Lucy smiled a real full smile that transformed her whole face. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Marcus brought up something that had been bothering him. That Blackwood guy knew about Jonathan's store. How'd he know that? Evelyn frowned. I don't know. It wasn't mentioned in the news story. Someone's been researching you, Marcus said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd learned early to be suspicious. Probably looking for leverage. You mean someone's investigating our family? Evelyn asked. We're a family, Marcus asked, then immediately looked like he wished he could take the words back. Yes, Evelyn said simply. We are. Lucy reached over and took Marcus's hand, then Evelyn's, connecting them like a bridge. She didn't speak, but her meaning was clear. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 50s stood at the door, her face weathered but kind, her clothes simple but clean. There was something familiar about her eyes, though Evelyn couldn't place it. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Diana Walsh. I was Crystal's sister, Marcus's aunt." Evelyn felt the world tilt slightly. Behind her, she heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. He'd been coming down the stairs but stopped frozen halfway. "I know I have no right to be here," Diana continued quickly. "I looked for Marcus for years after Crystal died, but the system, they wouldn't tell me where he was. Then I saw the news story about your barn, and there he was in the background, and I had to come." "Why?" Marcus's voice was hard older than his 15 years. Where were you when she dumped me?" Diana's eyes filled with tears. "I was in prison. 3 years for theft. I was an addict too then. By the time I got out and got clean, Crystal was dead and you were in the system. I've been clean 8 years now, but the state wouldn't tell me anything because of my record." Marcus descended the rest of the stairs slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal, or like he was the wild animal deciding whether to fight or flee. "You're clean now?" he asked. 8 years, 3 months, 12 days, Diana said precisely. "Why should I believe you?" Diana reached into her purse and pulled out a handful of CHIPS recovery milestones from NA meetings. Then she pulled out something else, a photograph of 2 young girls, maybe 8 and 10, grinning at the camera with identical smiles. "That's me and Crystal," she said. "Before everything went wrong. She kept this picture, you know. Even at her worst, she kept it." Marcus stared at the photo, and Evelyn saw him see his mother in a way he never had as someone who'd once been a child, innocent, unbroken. "I don't want anything from you," Diana said. "I just wanted to see you to know you were okay, and you are. You're more than okay. You found a good home." "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I did." Lucy, who'd been watching from behind Evelyn, suddenly darted forward and handed Diana a drawing. It was Marcus standing between Evelyn and Lucy, all 3 of them holding hands in front of the barn. Above them, she'd drawn stars, her symbol for the people who were gone, but still somehow present. Diana studied the drawing, then looked at her nephew. "I'm staying at the motel in town for a few days. If you want to talk or if you don't. I just wanted you to know you have blood family who loves you, even if we failed you." After she left, Marcus stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he said, "I might want to see her again. Is that okay?" "Of course," Evelyn said. "She's your family." "So are you," Marcus said quickly. "You and Lucy. You're my family too." "Families can be complicated," Evelyn said. "Look at this barn built on one family's tragedy, hiding another family's secret, and now bringing dozens of families together. There's room for all of it." Marcus met with Diana twice more over the next few days, each visit a little longer, a little easier. She told him stories about Crystal before the drugs showed him pictures helped him understand that his mother's abandonment had been about her illness, not his worth. When she left, they exchanged phone numbers and a promise to stay in touch. "She seems nice," Lucy whispered that night, curled up between Evelyn and Marcus on the couch as they watched a movie. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "Broken, but nice." "We're all broken," Evelyn reminded them. "That's what makes us interesting." August brought the 1-year anniversary of Jonathan's death. Evelyn hadn't realized how much she'd been dreading it until it was upon her. She woke that morning with a weight on her chest. Grief fresh as the day she'd found him collapsed in the garden, his heart finally giving out after months of fighting the cancer. Marcus and Lucy seemed to sense her mood. They made breakfast, scrambled eggs, and toast, slightly burned but made with love. They didn't ask her to talk, just stayed close, their presence a comfort. She decided to spend the day in the barn going through Jonathan's letters one more time. She'd read them all multiple times now, but today she wanted to read them again to feel close to him on this anniversary. She was deep in a letter from 1995 when Tom Morrison appeared in the doorway. "Thought you might be here," he said gently. "Mind some company?" "Not at all." Tom sat in the rocking chair Jonathan had placed there so many years ago. "I miss him," he said simply. "He was a complicated man, but he was a good friend. Did you ever resent him for keeping the secret you were his best friend? And he never told you." Tom considered this. "Maybe a little, but I kept secrets from him too. Never told him about my boy who died in Vietnam. Never told anyone, actually, except my wife. Some pain is too personal to share even with best friends. You had a son who died. Tommy Jr., 1969. He was 19. Tom pulled out his wallet, showed her a faded photograph of a young man in uniform. 46 years I've carried this. 46 years of wondering who he would have become. My God, Tom, I'm so sorry. Jonathan knew about loss. Maybe that's why we were friends. We could be around each other without having to explain the sadness. They sat in comfortable silence until Lucy appeared tugging on Evelyn's sleeve. She held up her notebook showing a new drawing Jonathan standing with Sarah and their baby, but also with Tommy Jr. and with Crystal Marcus's mother. All of them were connected by Lucy's signature stars. How did you know about Tommy Jr.? Tom asked, amazed. Lucy pointed to his wallet, where the edge of the photograph was still visible, then to his eyes. She whispered, "Same sad." Tom's eyes filled with tears. You're a wise little one, aren't you? That afternoon, the barn filled with people who'd come to remember Jonathan. The news about the anniversary had spread, and families who'd been touched by the barn's mission came to pay their respects. Dorothy and Howard Mitchell brought flowers. Rebecca brought her children, who sang a song they'd learned just for the occasion. Dr. Whitfield led a brief memorial service that was less about mourning and more about celebrating transformation. But the most unexpected visitor came as the sun was setting. Richard Blackwood returned, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was an elderly woman using a walker, her movements slow but determined. Mrs. Carter, Blackwood said, his demeanor completely different from before. I owe you an apology. This is my mother, Eleanor. Eleanor Blackwood's eyes were sharp despite her age. My son told me about this place, about what your husband built, what you've done with it. I had to see for myself. She moved slowly through the barn, taking in every detail. When she reached the memorial wall, she stood for a long time, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. I lost my daughter when she was 8, Eleanor said finally. Leukemia, 1962. My husband couldn't bear it, started drinking, died 5 years later. Richard never knew his sister, but he grew up in the shadow of her absence. Richard looked uncomfortable, vulnerable, in a way his expensive suit couldn't hide. Mother never talked about Jennifer, neither did Dad. It was like she never existed. That was wrong of me, Eleanor said firmly. I thought silence would protect us from the pain. All it did was lock us in with it. She turned to Evelyn. What you've done here, making a place where grief can be spoken, shared, transformed, it's what I wish I'd had 60 years ago. It's what Jonathan wished he'd had too, Evelyn said. He just didn't know how to create it while he was alive. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a check. This is for the barn. Not to commercialize it, she said with a sharp look at her son, but to preserve it. To make sure it stays exactly what it is, a place where broken hearts can mend together. The amount on the check made Evelyn gasp. It was enough to fund the barn's operations for years, to expand the programs to help more families without ever charging admission. I can't accept this, Evelyn said. You can, and you will, Eleanor said firmly. It's not charity. It's an investment in healing, and it's what my Jennifer would have wanted for her death to mean something to help other children and families. Richard helped his mother to a chair, then said quietly to Evelyn, I'm sorry about before. I saw opportunity where I should have seen sanctuary. Mothers helped me understand the difference. As the Blackwoods left, promising to return for the barn's programs, Marcus appeared beside Evelyn. That was weird, he said. Rich people actually doing something good. People surprise you sometimes, Evelyn said. Even rich people are just people carrying their own losses. Like Tom and his son. You heard that? Marcus shrugged. I hear everything. Foster kid survival skill. He paused, then added, Is that why you're adopting us, because of the babies you and Jonathan couldn't have? The question blunt as it was deserved an honest answer. Partly, but also because you're you and Lucy's Lucy, and we fit together somehow, like pieces of different puzzles that happen to match up at the edges. That's a really weird metaphor. I'm a really weird lady, remember? That night, as Evelyn tucked Lucy into bed, the little girl spoke more than she had in months. "Jonathan's not gone," she said clearly. "He's in the barn, in the stories, in us." "Yes," Evelyn agreed, smoothing Lucy's hair. "Love doesn't die. It just changes form. Like water to ice to steam." "Exactly like that." Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then, "My parents are steam now, but there's still water too somewhere." The poetry of it, the perfect metaphor from a 7-year-old who'd barely spoken in months, took Evelyn's breath away. September brought the start of a new school year. Marcus was a junior now, thinking about college in a way that would have been impossible a year ago. Lucy started 2nd grade armed with her notebook and a new confidence that came from finding her voice again. The adoption papers were moving through the system slowly but steadily. Diana had written a letter supporting the adoption, saying that while she loved Marcus, she knew Evelyn could give him the stable home he deserved. One afternoon, as fall began to paint the hills in reds and golds, Evelyn received a call that changed everything. It was Patricia, her sister, and she was crying. "Evie, I have cancer, breast cancer, stage 3. The world stopped. Evelyn sank into a chair, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to Patricia explain about treatments and prognosis and statistics. All she could think about was Jonathan, about watching him fade, about the unfairness of facing this again. "I'm coming to stay with you," Patricia said. "If that's okay. I don't want to do this alone." Of course you'll come here." When Evelyn told Marcus and Lucy, they processed the news in their own ways. Marcus went silent, then disappeared to shoot baskets for 2 hours. Lucy drew picture after picture of Aunt Patricia surrounded by hearts and stars and healing light. Patricia arrived a week later, thinner than when Evelyn had last seen her, but with the same determined spirit that had gotten them through their parents' deaths years ago. "So this is the famous barn," Patricia said, standing in the doorway. "It's more beautiful than I imagined." "It's a good place to heal," Evelyn said carefully. "Or a good place to die if it comes to that," Patricia said matter-of-factly. "Don't look at me like that. We have to be realistic. But I'm planning to fight like hell first." Patricia's presence changed the dynamics of the household. She was a natural, with Lucy teaching her card games and helping with homework. With Marcus, she was direct in a way that he respected, calling him on his teenage sullenness, but also treating him like an adult when it mattered. The barn became Patricia's refuge during chemotherapy. On her bad days, she'd sit in the rocking chair watching children play, drawing strength from their resilience. On good days, she helped with programs, sharing her own story with parents facing illness and uncertainty. One October afternoon, as Halloween decorations appeared around town, Patricia made an announcement at dinner. "I want to paint something in the barn. A mural of my own, if that's okay." "Of course," Evelyn said. "What did you have in mind?" "A tree. A family tree, but not the traditional kind. One that shows how families really form through choice and chance and love that doesn't follow bloodlines." Marcus looked interested. "Like how we're a family even though we're not related." "Exactly. You, Lucy, Evelyn, me, Jonathan, and Sarah. The baby who never was. Diana, Tom and his son. All the families who come to the barn. We're all connected not by blood but by something else. Something harder to name but just as real." They spent the next weeks working on the mural together. Patricia sketched the design despite hands that shook from chemo. Marcus mixed paints with the precision he brought to everything once he decided to care. Lucy added tiny details, birds and butterflies, and of course stars connecting everything. Evelyn painted the roots deep and intertwined, impossible to separate. The tree grew across the back wall of the barn, its branches reaching toward the ceiling, its roots diving deep into the foundation. Each branch held names, dates, small portraits. Some branches ended abruptly, the losses that had brought people to the barn. But from those broken branches, new growth emerged, reaching toward light. Dr. Whitfield, visiting for his weekly support group, stood transfixed by the mural. "This is extraordinary. It's a visual representation of complicated grief and post-traumatic growth. May I photograph it for my research?" "Research?" Patricia asked weakly. She was having a bad day, the chemo hitting hard. "I'm writing a paper on alternative grief therapies." This barn has become something unprecedented, a community-created healing space that emerged organically from one man's private sorrow. It's remarkable. That night, as Evelyn helped Patricia to bed, her sister grabbed her hand. "If I don't make it, don't talk like that. Listen to me. If I don't make it, I want you to add me to the tree. Not as an ending, but as part of the story. And I want you to know that these months here with you and the kids watching you build this family and this community, it's been the best time of my life." "You're going to be fine," Evelyn said, but her voice shook. "Maybe. But if I'm not, promise me you won't lock yourself away like Jonathan did. Promise me you'll keep the doors open literally and figuratively." "I promise." November came with unexpected news. The adoption was approved. Marcus and Lucy were officially legally Evelyn's children. They celebrated quietly, just the four of them, with Patricia insisting on making a cake despite her exhaustion. "To family," Patricia toasted with her juice glass. "However it forms, however long it lasts." "To family," they echoed. That night, Lucy crept into Evelyn's room. "Mom," she said, the words still new and precious. "Is Aunt Patricia going to be steamed soon?" Evelyn pulled Lucy close. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope not. But if she does, she'll still be with us. Love doesn't leave." "Like Jonathan and my first parents and Marcus's mom." Exactly like that. December brought snow unusual for Tennessee, transforming the barn into something from a fairy tale. The white blanket covered the rough edges, made everything seem softer, quieter, more peaceful. Patricia's latest scans showed the tumors were shrinking. Not gone, but fighting back against the treatment. The doctor called it cautiously optimistic, which Patricia translated as, "Not dead yet, so let's party." They decorated the barn for the holidays, every family who visited adding an ornament or decoration. By Christmas Eve, it looked like wonder itself, lights twinkling among the rafters. Paper snowflakes made by children's hands, a tree decorated with photographs of all the loved ones being remembered and honored. The Christmas Eve service at the barn had become a tradition. Families gathered to share stories of those they'd lost, to sing carols, to light candles for absent loves. This year, over 100 people came, filling the barn beyond capacity, spilling out into the snowy yard. Marcus played Jonathan's guitar, having learned over the months from YouTube videos and sheer determination. He played the lullabies Jonathan had written, and Lucy sang her voice clear and sweet, a miracle, considering her months of silence. Evelyn stood with Patricia, who leaned on her heavily but insisted on standing. They watched their makeshift family. Marcus tall and getting taller, growing into his father's body. Lucy no longer the terrified, silent child, but a bright spirit who'd found her voice. The community that had formed around a barn full of ghosts. "Jonathan would be so proud," Patricia whispered, "of all of this, of you." "He made it possible," Evelyn replied. "His grief, his love, his inability to let go, it all led to this." As midnight approached, Tom Morrison stood to speak. He'd become something of an elder statesman of the barn, his quiet presence a comfort to many. "First Christmas after my boy died," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed space. "I wanted to cancel the whole holiday. Seemed wrong to celebrate when Tommy wasn't here. My wife insisted we go through the motions for our other kids. I hated every minute of it." He paused, looking around the assembled faces. "But the second year I realized something. The pain didn't go away, but it sat different, like a stone in my pocket instead of a boulder on my chest. Third year, I could remember Tommy's terrible jokes at Christmas dinner and actually smile. Fourth year, I told one of those jokes myself." Several people nodded, recognizing the journey he described. "This barn," Tom continued, "it's like a shortcut through that journey. Not that it makes the grief go away faster, but it makes it so you don't have to carry it alone. Jonathan carried his alone for 35 years. We don't have to make that mistake." As people began to leave, exchanging hugs and promises to see each other soon, Richard Blackwood appeared with his mother Eleanor. They'd become regular fixtures, Eleanor leading a grandparents' grief group, Richard helping with the business aspects of running what had become a significant community organization. "We have news," Eleanor announced. "The state wants to recognize the barn as an official historical and cultural site. It would mean protection from development, some funding, and recognition of its significance. But more importantly, Richard added, looking embarrassed, I've been accepted to social work school, starting in January. I want to really do this work, not just throw money at it. Marcus snorted. A rich guy becoming a social worker? That's backwards. Maybe, Richard admitted, but this place has a way of turning everything backwards, doesn't it? As the last visitors left and snow continued to fall softly outside, Evelyn stood in the barn with her family. Patricia slowly improving. Marcus beginning to trust in permanence. Lucy finding her voice more each day. The murals Jonathan had painted watched over them, Sarah's dreams preserved in paint and love. The barn that had been locked for 35 years was now open every day. The secret that had stood between Evelyn and Jonathan had become a bridge connecting hundreds of people. The grief that had been silent and solitary was now spoken and shared. Next year, Patricia said, I want to add a music program, get proper instruments, maybe hire a teacher, music therapy for grieving kids. Next year, Marcus said, I want to start a teen group for kids like me who lost parents but don't want to talk about feelings with adults. Next year, Lucy said clearly, I want to write a book about the barn with pictures. Next year, Evelyn said, I want to just be here with all of you in this place that Jonathan built from sorrow and we've filled with something else. What's the something else? Lucy asked. Evelyn looked around the barn at the murals and the memorial wall, the toys waiting for tomorrow's children, the tree Patricia had painted, showing how families really grow, broken branches and new growth intertwined. Hope, she said finally. We've filled it with hope.